next, we're going to kind of shift a little bit. We're going to go from underwater to above ground and talk with our next presenter, who is Sandhya Narayanan. She's a linguistic anthropologist, which is a long way, big words of saying she studies languages so we better understand humans and culture. So she takes a look at what language means for culture and for humans, and she looks at it, I think, a little bit uniquely. So let's have her come up and tell us about that. So I'm going to add Sandhya to the stream.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Wes. Thanks so much. That was a great intro.
Did I get it all right? Did I get like the okay?
Yes, you did. You totally did. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a linguistic anthropologist. My name is Sandhya. Thank you, Wes, for that intro. Thank you, Joe Grabowski, for inviting me. And thank all of you for tuning in. I'm coming in from Lexington, Virginia, which I wish to acknowledge as the homeland of the Monacan Nation and tribe. And that is important to know because knowing the history of a place and a people also connects us with other things about their culture and history, and most importantly for me, their language and how they speak and how that all interrelates with each other. And so I'm going to share today with all of you a little bit of my story of like, what is a linguistic anthropologist? Why did I get into it? And some of my work in linguistic anthropology, particularly in South America. So I'm a linguistic anthropologist. I am not a computer specialist. So all glitchy, that's the disclaimer right now.
So you can blame those on me, as I'm, the one running virtual events here. Joe kind of teed me up as someone who knows what he's doing. So really, you can just blame it all on me. So I'll take that for you. Any technical errors are my fault here, everyone. It's not Sandhya. So we can assure you of that. So Sandhya's going to pull up her presentation, and it's fantastic. She's going to talk to us more about her work. And also, Sandhya and I get to work together a little bit more than just on this. We're also working together for the Lenovo EDU community, who is one of our sponsors for today, helping out. She's one of our field experts for the series with Lenovo EDU, which is an online ed community for innovators. And as someone who's innovating how we think about language and linguistics, I think she's a perfect fit for that. And if you want to learn more, go to education.lenovo.com. And you can see some write-ups from Sandhya and a couple videos. And soon there'll be a podcast too. We're really going to explore multilingualism and talk a little bit more. So if you get the bug for linguistics, we can go ahead and you can talk more. So let's bring that presentation up. Just go ahead and start displaying it, and it should. Oh, look, here we go.
Anyway, hold on, and I'm going to do this.
No secret peeks into her desktop. Sorry, everyone. We're going to make sure she's ready to go. Again, any errors are my fault, not hers.
So do you see 3 maps?
I see 3 maps. Oh, there's a ghost controller back here that's taken over. Yeah, I see 3 maps. I actually see 5 maps. No, so I think I've seen your preview.
Okay, 3 maps. Here we go.
So Sandhya, real quick, we're seeing the preview. So I'm not seeing your so you might want to switch view. There we go.
There we go.
3 maps. See, yes. Teamwork. This is what it's all about. Collaboration, learning from each other.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly. It's all about that collaboration. Thank you. And by the way, I also love your t-shirt.
Oh, my Explorers. Yeah, the Socially Distanced Learning Explorers Club. Yeah, it's pretty much what I've been doing all year. So we're going to keep that going with this. And thank you, Sandhya.
Well, speaking of socially distanced, so why did I get into linguistic anthropology? So a little bit about me, I guess, because I grew up, I basically grew up in a home, but also in areas where people spoke a lot of languages, and people spoke really differently everywhere. My parents are from southern India, and I grew up with my grandmother, and I grew up with extended families around me, and I grew up in a community where everyone spoke many different languages. But I was born in Canada and Toronto, and I went to school with kids whose parents came from every corner of the globe. And in different neighborhoods across the Greater Toronto Area, you can go through it and you can hear a different language in each neighborhood that you go to and in each part of the Greater Toronto Area, each one representing a different place that people came from. I spent my adolescent years in Boston, also again a place where not only are there different languages, but it's also famous for our very lovely and highly entertaining Boston accent. In another life, I could get hired to be an accent coach. Maybe one day I will. It'll probably be a Matt Damon or a Casey Affleck film because that's just what happens. But hey, I still have a lot of life to live. It could happen. So I always sort of grew up like interested in language and the role that it played because with more languages and ways of speaking, you use them for different things. You use them to talk about different things. You use them to gossip in different ways. You have different languages that you get punished in. You get different languages and ways of saying, I love you, or you're good. You can, of course, have many different ways to swear at other people, which is always fun to learn growing up, right? So a lot of my own understanding of the world came from understanding and noticing the different ways that people spoke and what that meant for them and where they came from and what did it mean to speak a certain way in a particular place and time. And so when I went to college, I was like most 18-year-olds. I was interested in the whole wide world, but couldn't really figure out what exactly I wanted to do. But I wanted to do it all, and I wanted to know it all. And then I came across a field called linguistics, and I'm like, what is this? It's the science of languages. Wow, that's awesome. Sign me up. I did a few of those. Some of those classes was fun. And then I took one course, Linguistic Anthropology. Like, what's that? It's about how language intersects with culture, but also what does it mean to be a human person as understood through the languages that we speak. And I do mean human person. And that just blew my mind. I was like, wait, where have you been my entire life? Sign me up for this like field of study. I want to do linguistic anthropology. That is my life. I've been trying to tell people this are the things that interest me, and finally a field that gets me. So I signed up. I did the major. I went to grad school. I have a PhD. I am basically like too far deep down this rabbit hole to ever leave, and I'm loving every single moment of it. Now, this was sort of my upbringing, right? I come from like South Asian immigrant parents. I'm first generation immigrant. I lived in multilingual places, but I also wanted to see how that might be different in different places around the earth, right? Around the globe, and what might be similar to my experiences, but also what might be different and what that says about who we are as speakers and what it means to speak languages that are specific or special to the places that we come from. So I sort of looked at a map and a globe, and I thought, I might want to go to South America. And I sort of looked at a country and I thought, let me go to Peru. I've heard a lot about Peru. And I ended up choosing not only Peru, but deciding to go to some of the highest places in Peru. So I went to this area right on the southern border that borders Bolivia called the Altiplano. And the Altiplano in Spanish, it basically means the place that is high and flat. It's basically a flat plateau, kind of like the plains of Montana or the Tibetan plateau, but it's high and elevated. My standard elevation every day was about 3,800 meters, and from there it just went up. I was mostly walking around places that were about 4,000 meters above sea level. So it's pretty far up, even though it's flat, it's still pretty high. And every time I go down there, there's about a week where I'm out of commission and folks there make fun of me because all I do is like drink tea and like hold my stomach in a fetal position to be like, it's okay. It'll be okay. But after that, I get used to the altitude. And the beautiful thing about the Altiplano is that the entire region is nestled right around Lake Titicaca, which is the highest lake in the world. And it is a beautiful lake. This is one of those panoramic views from me doing walks in and around the villages that lie right on the banks of Lake Titicaca. And this is actually one of these villages right after a hailstorm. Everything is, even though it hailed, everything is verdant green, flowers are blooming, and it's also the peak time of crop production. But the Altiplano is not only known for Lake Titicaca and this beautiful, gorgeous lake that is important to Puneños, people from Puno, people from the Altiplano. It's especially known because it's nestled in the Andes for its high mountain peaks. And these mountain peaks are important. They're significant. They actually play a significant role as local deities. And everywhere you go, people know what their local mountain deity or apu is. And they hold specific rituals for these apus every year to ensure that there's protection and also wealth and subsistence from them, because what's on top of these apus are these glacial ice caps from which the runoff waters flow down and water their fields and make sure that there's enough green pastures to sustain life for their alpaca and llama herds. This particular apu, by the way, every apu has a name, and this one's name is Apu Alien Kapak. In the Quechua language, that means he who is good and rich. And what is he good and rich in? 1, snow, but 2, also gold. There is gold under that mountain. There is gold under that hill. So this is Apu Alien Kapak, and a lot of the people that I worked with when I wanted to look at language lived at the foot of many of these mountains, and they would take me up to see these mountains during points of celebration and holidays, and to make offerings, yearly offerings, to ensure the survival of fields and the health of their livestock. But the Altiplano, yes, it has Lake Titicaca, and yes, it has high mountains, but there's also a small part of the Altiplano that goes deep into the Amazonian jungle, like a very small sliver. And that is when you cross those high peak mountains and then you go down, and it's literally just down. There's one of these roads that I would go straight up into, and there's a little church for you to like make your peace with God, because it is a straight drop down along a winding tiny road. But once you survive that little winding tiny road, because you made your peace with God up at that little chapel before you came down, you see this lush verdant valleys, and these are sort of the entrances to the Amazonian jungle. And these communities have been here for over half a millennia, about, more or less, living in these Amazonian lowland valleys. In the past, generally people grow the same thing that they do high up in the Altiplano, like potatoes and tubers. But if you go lower into these Amazonian valleys, the primary crop becomes something else, and we'll get to it later. So the Altiplano, fun fact, a lot of you actually eat this plant, but you don't know what it looks like. This is quinoa. That's what it looks like before it's harvested. And at the peak of harvest season in March and April, you could see fields of like bright purple and fuchsia and magenta, which is basically quinoa. And it's from those little flowers that you get the seeds that you make your like quinoa rice with, and quinoa flour and everything quinoa and quinoa bars. It comes from that plant. It's gorgeous. It's a lot of work to get out. It definitely is. It's a lot. There's a lot of, I spent many days beating quinoa like that. But if you go to the lowlands, their primary crops are the lovely chocolate, cacao in these beautiful yellow pods and green pods. And of course, my favorite, because I can't live without it, coffee. Yes, I am a caffeine addict. I am proud of it. I love my caffeine. I must have it. And thank God for coffee. And thank God I know how it's made, and I've actually harvested myself. So you're wondering now, like, so what on earth did you go actually to the Altiplano to do? It's like, yeah, there's quinoa, yeah, there's coffee, chocolate, that's pretty awesome. But you didn't go there to eat that, all, and just do that. And the answer is half right. I kind of did. I mean, I really did want to go down to the Amazon just to eat chocolate. That was good part of the reason there. Who doesn't? And get coffee in the process. But I actually also went down there to look at how the indigenous languages were spoken. And I particularly chose the Altiplano because unlike other areas in the Andes, the Altiplano was home to not one, but two indigenous languages. And if you go today to the capital city in the area, Puno, you'll find the sign on their town hall building. And what's interesting about the sign is that you can see on it 3 languages written. In the center, right over here, Municipalidad Provincial Puno, it's Spanish for Provincial Municipality of Puno, basically on their town hall. But what's interesting is at the top and on the bottom, you have the same thing written in the 2 indigenous languages spoken in the area. On the top, you see it written in Quechua, Yaktlahuasin Punusuyupi. And then on the bottom, it's written in Aymara, Punusuyumarka Kamatirinakano Utapa, right? And that's what I wanted to go down and see. I wanted to see what it meant to be a speaker of these indigenous languages. What did it mean to be a speaker of Quechua and Aymara in Puno today, in the Altiplano today? And especially considering histories where speaking an indigenous language was not only devalued, but could also be punishable. And being indigenous and identifying with an indigenous identity, let alone speak that language, was something that was barred from public use. You could be punished for it. You could be beaten or killed for it. So what did it mean today, given those histories, to still be a speaker of those languages? And what did it mean to also be from an area like Puno, which had this type of multilingualism that seemed very familiar with areas that I grew up in and from areas that my parents came from as well, which were also really highly multilingual. So what does that all mean, right? And how is it working, and how is it changing, and how is it changing in the way people are talking, in teaching the language, and also thinking about the language, right? So I spent a lot of time interviewing people, going to parties with them and festivals. This is actually a festival from Apu Alin Kapak Raini, the party celebrating the mountain god Apu Kapak, right here in the background, right back here, right? So every year in end of June, I think it's June 24th, this community of Pakahe and Makusani, all in this region and province called Carabaya, they would go up to the base of the mountain and have a major celebration in honor of their local mountain deity. They would make offerings, they would have ritual offerings, but they would also be singing and dancing, and many like large festivities. You could see cotton candy vendors in the background in this picture. But I would spend time. I would get to know folks. I would interview them. I would do recordings with them, and I would also follow them around in their lives to see what it meant to be a speaker of either of these indigenous languages. What did it mean to be a speaker of Quechua in this area? What did it mean to be a speaker of Aymara in this area? I also was really interested in how they might be teaching these languages to their kids, right? So how is it that parents who themselves were either told you shouldn't speak these indigenous languages were thinking about teaching them to their children for the next generation, since sensibilities are changing? And not only how they're teaching it at home, but what type of attempts were taking place at school, right? So in one of the schools that I did work in, there were very few programs that taught Quechua and Aymara in the school, but the few that did tried their best with, making alphabet charts. This is one for Aymara, and here is one for Quechua, conjugation tables, as well as activities, singing time, song time, and to see what was going on there, to understand, okay, so there's been so many years when no one wanted to talk about these languages, when no one wanted to even think about teaching them. People learned it from hearing their parents and grandparents, but the idea of actively teaching it was something that was like, that's crazy. Why would you do that? So what was happening now with these schools? But a lot of the time, again, was spent interviewing people, and interviewing about everything, their stories, their language. I would have sentences and say, like, can you please say this for me in Quechua? Okay. Can you please say this for me in Aymara? Can you please say the boy stole a piece of cheese from the house in Quechua and Aymara? I would get a ton of recordings like that. And then in the process, there'd also be that give and take where, you know, I would try and repeat and they would laugh at me and I would laugh at me because, like, I know it's wrong. I don't know why. And then they would say it again and I would repeat and it was wrong and they would laugh and I would laugh. But then every once in a while I would say something and they would be surprised. Yeah, I had a vegetable lady I would always buy from and I would haggle with her in Quechua. She enjoyed it. It was like our Thursday ritual. She knew I was going to come. She knew it was going to be like haggling time in Quechua from, you know, this weird girl from the United States coming down from North America. Yeah, but that's how I would use it. So when I was asked to do this, I was thinking about, you know, what were sort of the more memorable aspects of this field work. And kind of in keeping with the theme for this entire 3-day, you know, festival of speakers, I would say the most memorable aspect of the work that I did was not just that I got to know the lives of the people that I was interviewing a lot of the time, but in particular, I got to spend a lot of time with the women of this area. So most of my teachers, most of my recordings, most of what I got to know about what it meant to be a speaker of Quechua and Aymara throughout the Altiplano came from me getting to know the women and indigenous women of this region and get to understand not only the history of Quechua and Aymara populations throughout the Altiplano, but also really understand what it meant to be an indigenous woman, an indigenous Quechua woman, female speaker and female Aymara speaker from the region. And that gave me insight because it wasn't just about the language, but how it connected with their lives. Take, for instance, this is a lovely picture of my neighbor, Elena, Senora Elena. She was my neighbor. And every time I wanted to talk with her, we would always be doing something, a lot of work, often in the fields, but more often than not, it was herding her sheep. I think she liked to take me along because I was faster than her. So if the sheep got away, I was willing and slightly stupid enough to actually go chase it on a mountainside, you know, because that, you know, it's like sheep running, gotta go get it. But Senora Elena has lived in these communities her entire life, in these communities overlooking Lake Titicaca, herding her sheep, tending her cows, and also tending her fields where she grew quinoa. That quinoa crop actually came from her fields, and you can see some like tiny baby ones here in this corner. So from Senora Elena, you know, I learned not only how to speak Aymara, but also what did it mean for her to be a speaker of Aymara who's lived a little over 60 years at the time that this picture was taken in that community, see her parents be buried in that community, grow up in that community, get married in that community, have children in that community, see neighbors come and go with old age or move other places. And through her, I got a really interesting set of stories and a unique experience, not only about life in that village, but life in that village as told through her in her Aymara. The same would be from this lady, Senora Celia. Senora Celia was also an Aymara speaker, but unlike Senora Elena, who always lived high up in the mountains, Senora Celia lived further down in the Amazonian jungle. She was one of the first families actually in the 60s and 70s to leave the highlands to go down into the Amazon and create small coffee and chocolate plantations. So whenever I would go down there to visit her, we would always have a fun time because we would go, we would pick chocolate, we would pick coffee, and she would sing songs. The woman loved to sing. She asked me to sing once, and I sang something, and she didn't like it, so she told me, it's okay, I'll take care of the singing from here on in. But we would take lunchtime breaks. She would bring the little lunch pot, and we would have a little picnic underneath all the coffee tree branches. And during those lunch breaks, she liked to smoke her cigarettes. She said she liked the smell and that it kept the bugs away. I think she also liked the nicotine high. And it was during those lunchtime breaks when she would take a long drag from her cigarette, she would start telling her stories in Aymara. And her Aymara was slightly different, not only because she lived in the jungle, but her own home village was in a different area of the Altiplano, different from Senora Elena. So her Aymara and her stories told a unique set of experiences that reflected her life. It reflected the story of her marriage, of how she moved down to the jungle, of how she would go up and visit her parents in their ancestral village back in that other province in the Altiplano, the story of her kids, and the story of what it meant to be for her, who had now spent the vast majority of her life in these newly developed colonies down in the Amazonian lowlands, smoking her cigarette and singing songs. But it wasn't only just my conversations with women, but it was also, I got really interested in how women were portrayed, what type of female Indigenous speakers were valued, were cultivated, were created, and being popularized in the region. And one major one, it came from their mythical story of the founding of Puno and eventually the founding of the Inca Empire. This is the story of the divine twins, Manco Capac, who's the guy, and Mama Oclio, who's the woman. And according to the myth, Earth was a pretty bad place and the Altiplano not so great. So the sun god has sent his children, Manco Capac and Mama Oclio, to come out of the shores of Lake Titicaca, say that we are here, we are the children of the sun god, and from there go north and keep going further north until they hit Cusco to set up the Inca Empire. But the first stop on that journey was in Puno, was in Altiplano, thereby connecting Cusco with Lake Titicaca and the sacredness of that lake and the sacredness of that region. But of the two characters that everyone loved every year, they did this reenactment every year, November 4th, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. They would do these reenactments. They would hire actors. They would get local actors to play these mythical roles. And every year, the character that everyone wanted to see was who was going to be Mama Oclio, who was going to be the woman to play the Indigenous mythical origin mother of the region. In more contemporary days, right, today, it's also, there are more opportunities for young girls to get interested and reaffirm their Indigenous identity and their culture and their language. And this is mostly happening through beauty pageants. So there's a lot of glitz and glamour with beauty pageants, especially in the Indigenous beauty pageants where you represent your region. But it is also an opportunity for these young women to also answer interview questions and to talk about who they are and where they're from and what it means and why it's important to them to know how to speak their language. This particular young girl, she actually went on to win the beauty pageant that evening, is from a small province actually close to the Amazon called Cuyo Cuyo. And they're famous for this headdress and for these long skirts and a very particular dance. But she also, notably that night, was really proud when they asked her interview questions about where she's from, why she's proud of it, and they asked her all of this in Spanish. She responded to everything in Quechua and was very proud to say that I am a Quechua speaker, I am Quechua, and I'm Quechua from Cuyo Cuyo. And these are these opportunities that are afforded not just to young people, but really to young women, as the new sort of standard bearers of really bringing about a new sense of Indigenous identity and pride in being an Indigenous person, an Indigenous language speaker in the region. I want to say thank you and end with this one little picture that I took during one of the major holidays that actually just finished, the Fiesta De Candelaria. It's a 2-week party blowout in the main city of Puno, but it's a chance for all of the various provinces and regions to come and dance in the streets of Puno and bring dances that are traditional to this area. And this particular dance is called the Ayarachis of, I think, San Jose de Esquilache, which is another border sort of lowland village area. This dance is typically a very militaristic style dance. It's a soldier dance. It has a lot of marching formations and sticks where they hit and play fight with each other as part of the dance. And it was pretty much only done by men, and still is. If you look at the troops that come in, it's a lot of men dancing. But in this particular year that I took this picture, I found a couple young ladies also participating in it, and I just had to take that picture. And I wanted to end it with this picture because this girl looked so excited and partially tired from dancing all day. So once again, thank you. You hear my contact info, my Facebook page as well. And take it away, Wes.
Well, that was fantastic and a really fun look into the world that you spent so much time in, which I think we were down in Peru at the same time and ran into each other in all places randomly in the Lima airport. Nothing like looking over and seeing like, wait, I know that human and what's going on. So I have to ask, after all the questions about linguistics and accents and how that plays into things and the way we pronunciate, pronounce things, pronunciate clearly. What is your favorite accent?
Oh.
And why?
Yeah, that favorite one, that very favorite one. I am partial to that Boston, Italian, Irish accent, because there's a lot of fun stories I have growing up. Because my brother and I moved when we were teenagers. I just remember being like, everyone here talks differently. Why are they speaking so weird? And they're like, what's weird? I'm like, the way you're talking. I'm like, oh, you mean weird?
Yeah, well, exactly. You're like, what
it's weird. And I'm like, the way you're all talking, that's weird. I'm like, oh, they're like, oh, you mean weird? Yes. I do. So I am partial to that. I have lately been really into the New Zealand accent, the Kiwis.
Yeah, I
really love it. It's I love imitating it. I'm trying to learn it, but there's something they also say things like weird like that, and their intonation patterns are really interesting because it's like their vowels are very short. The way they say their words is very crisp and short, and you can feel and hear the stress in syllables. But despite all of that, it's also like very intonational, like high and low. And I've been really getting into the Kiwi. I love the Kiwi. If there are Kiwis here, I love Kiwi English.
So I'm very partial to the Kiwi accent. Some of my very close friends are from New Zealand, and frankly, I'm just jealous because I also too would love to, have a home country with the amazing beauty and everything that place has. It's really incredible. So it sounds like for you that you like the languages that are a little sing-songy, and I'm curious, where does that come from? Like, if there is that, what does that mean if an accent or language has that kind of like rhythm to it? Is there a reason behind it?
No, there isn't. There are some correlations, and usually they correlate with things like stress patternings, so where stress falls in the words, how words are made, so how many syllables go into a word, how many vowels there are within these syllables. So you can make predictions like that, but as to any reason why, no. That's the thing about intonation and tone. They're all sort of separate features of a grammar of any language, and they're sort of separate and distinct, but they all sort of come together. And that intonation and stress, those are the things that are the hardest to sort of track, but they're also like, those are like, they're like the defining aspects of the language as well. It's like the glue that makes that language or dialect very unique. Yeah.
And all that's running in the background while we're like doing all of our other thoughts is like how to talk that way. And I have my last question, because it's something that I've wanted to ask you for a while, but I keep forgetting to ask. So I know that sometimes when you're around people who have different dialect or accent than you almost mimic it sometimes, or at least I found myself to like, you match their patterns. Why?
Yeah, it's actually called, there's a term for it.
Oh, really?
There's an actual term for it. It's called accommodation.
Oh.
Yeah,
Sounds
it's
right.
called accommodation. You sort of match and mirror it. And there's like psychological studies called like mirror neurons, where you want to be in tune with the person you're speaking with. But just generally, when we talk with people, we want to feel like we have a connection with them, right? Like when you speak with someone, you know, friend wise, parent wise. I mean, Valentine's Day, all of you guys are going to go on dates. You want to feel like there is a connection, and it becomes very clear when there isn't. Part of the sign and the reason of wanting to make that connection is having those like alignments or mirroring or similarities in how you talk with each other. So that is part of that way of just our sort of our human psychology, really, our linguistic human psychology, to wanting to establish that type of connection to keep those, you know, that conversation going. Yeah. So it's sort of like that linguistic psychological drive to make a connection and to keep it going.
That's exactly, I've been wanting to ask that forever, like kind of understand it, because I know I do it. So I was curious, is there a reason? So it sounds like it's a way to like, okay, I want to be friends with you because I'm picking up some of your connotations and the way you say things. So we're friends, right? And I feel like that's what that is. That kind of how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. You and it's like it was on both ends, right? Like both, like if you think of, I mean, two people is the easy.
Like any good relationship, it should have, you know, give and take.
It work on both ends. You need work from both parties. Both parties need to agree to work together in the middle. Yeah, but that's what it is. It's you want to make that connection, the other person does, so you can actually measure it individually, like what that gradual change looks like from both people over the course. And when it doesn't happen, like that's part of the reason why conversations fail, or you know, that connection isn't felt. Like one person might be accommodating, the other might not be.
Yeah.
Or recognizing that there is subconsciously, right? Not just like active, like, oh, they're trying to accommodate me, but hearing and like somewhere in the back of your head, you recognize it, because that also gets reflected in how you continue to talk with that person.
That's so cool that just from that one little thing you can start to potentially see so much. And it's wild to think how much language is tied into how we connect with each other. I mean, it makes sense, but also even on that like deep level that it has some effect. So that's really cool. Thank you for like answering my question I've been wanting to ask for a while, and I'm hoping everyone else learned something from that too. And if you want to know more about Sandhya's work and what she does, you could actually head over to Lenovo's the Lenovo EDU site, and you can see a blog post from Sandhya and a video talking about multilingualism and her back and like how she got to, you know, where she is. And there'll be more coming out, as we're going to be talking very soon about multilingualism on the podcast for the Lenovo EDU, the Meridian Treehouse podcast, which will be coming out sometime in the next few months. So we're going to have that with you, Sandhya, and a few other amazing field experts. So I'm looking forward to learning more and experimenting with some accents, because I have a feeling that's going to come up at some point. We're going to do some accent work.
Fun with accents. You know, Vanity Fair can do it, but you have experts. Why not?
Exactly. So 73 questions on accent sounds like something we might have to think about.
Yeah. Or what to think. What? How do you know it's a blah accent?
A blah accent.
Like fill in the blank.
Oh God, I was like, wait, there are accents that you just think they're like blah?
Yeah. No, there's not accents that you think that are blah, but there probably is a blah accent where it just goes blah blah blah. It's like the peanuts teacher accent.
So that sounds like we're going to have to talk more. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Lenovo EDU and follow Sandhya. She put up her socials and her contact information. So definitely get to know her a little bit better. And thank you, Sandhya, for hanging out with us on a Friday night and wrapping up the first half of the day. This is our day programming's wrapping up. We're going to have a few more people later on this evening, but thank you again. And it was just good to see you.
You too. It was awesome seeing you.
So we'll talk to you soon and have a great weekend. Thanks again.
You too. Thank you so much.